Usually when we're talking about the Russia collusion conspiracy theory, we're talking about how people in federal agencies weaponized this theory in order to take action against the Trump campaign or the Trump administration. What's interesting is that it did actually also embroil President Obama, former President Obama, and former Vice President Joe Biden. We had actually a pretty early indication of their involvement because Susan Rice had put out an email to herself on Inauguration Day, cryptically talking about a meeting in the Oval Office where they discussed incoming National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. And so we knew that they were involved, and we also knew because of other texts that had come out that FBI and Department of Justice officials were talking about briefing the White House, briefing Obama himself on what they characterized as a counterintelligence probe. Might have been better described as a criminal probe, but what they characterized as a counterintelligence probe, and counterintelligence probes are for the benefit of the president. So there's nothing improper, if there's nothing improper with the counterintelligence probe, of briefing the president about that matter. But as details have come out about the January 5th meeting through declassifications, not through good reporting or journalism, but just through declassifications, there are a lot of questions that we don't have the answer to. We know that Joe Biden and Barack Obama were in this meeting with very few select other officials talking about Russia concerns on January 5th. We have some debate about who brought up an issue that would come to pose major problems for Mike Flynn. And that issue is something called the Logan Act. The Logan Act is a law that was written, I think, in 1799. It's never been used for prosecution. It had a couple of failed attempts early on to attempt to use it for prosecution. It's widely considered unconstitutional, but what it says is that no private citizen can correspond with heads of foreign governments. So even if you believed that the Logan Act was a valid law, which is highly in dispute, it wouldn't apply in this case because Mike Flynn was not a private citizen, but literally the incoming national security advisor who was talking to leaders of foreign countries as incoming national security advisors are supposed to do. I actually had seen a video of Joe Biden saying years ago that if he were elected president, before he was elected, he would have his Secretary of State communicate with leaders of foreign governments. So Joe Biden himself doesn't think that this would be a violation. But someone brings it up in the meeting, and we're a little unclear on who it is. Some people say that it was Jim Comey. Some people say that it was Joe Biden. They each have evidence in support of it, but there's no question that Joe Biden was in on the conversation about whether to use the Logan Act to go after Mike Flynn. January 5th, 2017 is an important date. It is the next day that the dossier is briefed to President Trump, even though, as we know, that was a completely ludicrous document, and they knew it was a ludicrous document by that point in time. When James Comey briefs President Trump on this dossier, he later says, or he tells him, I have to do this because the media are looking for a hook to talk about this dossier. Well, guess what hook they used? The fact that James Comey briefed President Trump on the dossier. So it was used just to have an excuse to get it out and into the discussion. Also happening shortly thereafter is that Mike Flynn's conversations with Ambassador Kislyak, completely appropriate conversations, incidentally, the fact of them are leaked to multiple reporters, some at the Wall Street Journal, and then a columnist at the Washington Post who has lower journalistic standards for publishing. David Ignatius publishes a piece saying, is it possible that this is a violation of, you guessed it, the Logan Act? So this is something that's used. Then we have contemporaneous evidence that analysts and FBI agents who were working on the case say once the Logan Act was out in the press, thanks to David Ignatius taking this leak and regurgitating it exactly as directed, that they then have greater impetus to go after Flynn. The whole investigation was supposed to be closed. They keep it open for this Logan Act reasoning, and they just keep going after him month after month after month. They interview him. They don't tell him that it's a setup, that he's being put into a perjury trap. They, in fact, go out of their way to give every indication to the contrary. There's no problem in that interview for months and months. Then the special counsel probe starts. We just got newly released information that the case agent who had been working on the Mike Flynn probe from the very beginning, first of all, he said he never understood the case. It was never there. It was supposition upon supposition. He felt it was politically motivated. It starts getting taken over by the political leadership, which is the opposite of how some things are supposed to be done at the FBI. The agents are supposed to investigate, and if they need some legal authority or something, they're supposed to take their case to the attorneys who oversee them. he said everything up was down, that it was the attorneys who were trying to make the case and that the agents would just have to sign off on whatever the attorneys wanted. They start having real serious interest. He first fingers Andrew McCabe, who was, of course, later fired for lying about his leaks to the media, as someone who had a strong interest. When the special counsel takes over, the agent tells the special counsel's office, Mike Flynn has committed no crime. They're upset. They want to talk to him about, phone calls he had, or about speeches he gave in Russia and whatnot. And they keep pursuing him until they finally get him to plead guilty to lying in that initial interview, which is of some question. He later withdraws that plea, and we're currently fighting over whether the Department of Justice, which has asked for that prosecution to be dropped, has the right to do it. They do according to the Constitution, but a judge and a higher court have said that it's fine to keep things going against Flynn, so we'll have to see how that goes. Important thing being, though, Biden is involved in the whole thing. Back to Mike Flynn, he says, or at one point, he actually asks for an unmasking of Mike Flynn. That's where you have intercepts where it's permissible to collect information on American citizens so long as you hide their identity as you pass that information around. But analysts are allowed to ask for something to be unmasked so they can better understand what that intelligence gathering was. Now, usually that's done by analysts, by career officials. What was so interesting about the transition between the Obama presidency and the Trump presidency is that you had just hundreds of people actually unmasking, hundreds of political officials unmasking identities of Trump campaign affiliates, and Joe Biden was one of them. And he did that during the transition. So these are all things that are very interesting for Joe Biden's involvement in the whole Russia collusion conspiracy theory. One of the interesting things about the role that President Obama and Vice President Biden played in the Russia collusion conspiracy theory is that virtually no reporters have asked them a single question about it. Many months ago, George Stephanopoulos asked him if he had anything to do with, I think it was the Mike Flynn situation in particular, but maybe it was Russia probe in general, and he said, I had nothing to do with it. And not too long after that, it was revealed that, in fact, he was one of the people who had unmasked General Mike Flynn, and that when that was revealed, then still nobody asked him to explain how he had gotten it so wrong, or very few people have asked him to explain. So the first and most important thing for Chris Wallace and for all journalists who care about accurately covering the news, they just need to ask some questions of their own design. They need to understand that this is an important story and that Joe Biden played a role in it, and they should ask it. So some of the questions I think would be worth talking about would be why exactly he unmasked Mike Flynn during the transition, and whether he was unmasking other people who were Trump campaign affiliates or incoming Trump administration officials, and why. Now, the person who asks that question should know how unusual it is for someone in Joe Biden's position to be unmasking, and they should be able to understand exactly what he's saying and how he answers it. Another thing that's very important, we've known for years now that Joe Biden was present in this meeting where the strategy was developed to go after Mike Flynn. This is a big issue, and again, relates to their refusal to have a peaceful transferal of power between the two administrations. That's something journalists claim to care about, and here's an opportunity to show that that's true by asking about just what in the world Obama and Biden were doing taking part in this level of investigation, bringing up the Logan Act, or how they responded to the Logan Act, this discredited investigative approach that was used to go after Mike Flynn, prosecutorial approach. And just in general, I think maybe Joe Biden should be asked whether he would think it's okay, given all of his and his family's really confusing and interesting and complex ties to Ukraine, to Romania, to Russia, to China, whether he thinks that the Trump administration should be spying on him and his family members right now. If he doesn't think that, why he would have a problem with it, particularly if he says he's done nothing wrong, and just kind of getting a good understanding of what he thinks should be allowed. Any question would be more than what we've seen thus far, but certainly this is the dominant story of the Trump administration, was this Russia collusion conspiracy theory. Obama and Biden played a significant role in this conspiracy theory, and finally, at some point, they should be asked some questions about it. Conspiracy theories are very dangerous, or they can be very dangerous. And our country was gripped by elites holding on to an unsubstantiated and frankly delusional conspiracy theory that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia for nefarious reasons. This was a story that was dripped out day after day, week after week, month after month, for years, and it had really serious consequences. It had serious foreign policy consequences. It affected how our country operates with other countries. It made it more difficult to take on China. If you know anything about how you have to triangulate certain countries to take on threats like what's in China. It affected elections. The 2018 election had a cloud of Russia collusion hanging over it, where a lot of people believed, because the media had told them that it was credible, that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia. This story was serious. It was major. And when it ended without any evidence of collusion with Russia, the media and other partisans attempted to drop it. But that's not appropriate. What we saw in that story was not just how damaging and dangerous that conspiracy theory was, but how intelligence agencies and law enforcement can be weaponized for political gain, how administrative bureaucracies can think that they get to set foreign policy, that if they have a problem with who the American people elected, that they get to do whatever it takes to take it on. So this is a very important story. I know it's hugely embarrassing for the media that they helped out with this, and it's hugely embarrassing for anyone who claims to be smart but actually fell for it. But it's very important that Americans have trust in their law enforcement and intelligence agencies. This was completely corrupted, completely destroyed any trust that those people might have. And so it's very important that our media, even though it's humiliating for them, do something to hold people accountable and hold themselves accountable for what they did. And finally, people who actually care about law enforcement and who actually care about justice need to hold these people accountable as well. It's one thing that we have this information coming out and it's very helpful, but until people are indicted and go to jail for what they did, it doesn't really matter.